Welcome everybody to Victor's Forbidden Desire. Please do enjoy this next video.
Dust hung thick in the barn when Declan Flynn heard the rancher's boots on the wooden planks behind him. He was bent over the water trough, shirt plastered to his back with sweat from hauling feed all morning. When he turned, Jasper Kane stood there, silver eyes burning through the shadows, blocking the only way out. Declan's heart hammered against his ribs, because he knew that look, had seen it building for weeks now. Every time the rancher watched him work, the air between them crackled like lightning about to strike. Jasper took one step closer, then another, until Declan could feel the heat radiating off the older man's chest. This was the moment everything would change, and there was nowhere left to run. If you want to hear uncensored, too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description. Tell us where you are watching from and subscribe. The Montana Territory stretched harsh and unforgiving under the summer sun, a land where only the strong survived and the weak disappeared into unmarked graves. Declan Flynn had arrived at the Broken Spur Ranch 3 months ago, with nothing but the clothes on his back and desperation carved into every line of his face. At 22, he had already buried a father to drink, a mother to sorrow, and any hope of inheriting the small farm that had been sold for debts before the earth had settled on their graves. Jasper Kane had taken one look at him, all lean muscle and hollow cheeks, and offered him work without asking questions. The rancher was a man of few words, weathered by 40 hard years on the frontier, his face carved by wind and sun into something between handsome and dangerous. And he stood tall enough to make most men step back, broad-shouldered, with hands that could break a wild horse or build a fence that would stand for generations. That first day, Jasper had walked Declan around the property, pointing out the cattle pens, the grazing fields, the creek that ran silver through the valley. But what Declan noticed most was the way the rancher moved, confident and certain, like he owned not just the land, but the very air above it. There was something in those eyes, storm gray and penetrating, that made Declan feel exposed, as if Jasper could see straight through to the fear and longing he kept locked tight inside. The work was brutal. Declan woke before dawn, hauling water, mending fences, breaking his back in the fields while the sun beat down merciless and cruel. His hands blistered, then calloused. His muscles screamed, then strengthened. And through it all, he felt Jasper's gaze on him, watching, measuring, waiting for something Declan could not name. They worked in silence most days. Jasper was not a man for idle conversation, and Declan had learned young that words could be dangerous. But in the quiet, something else grew between them, thick and charged like the air before a thunderstorm. It lived in the moments when their hands brushed passing tools, when Jasper steadied him after he stumbled on loose rock, when their eyes met across the paddock and neither looked away. Declan told himself it meant nothing. He was a farmhand, nothing more. Jasper was his employer, a man who could send him packing with a word. But late at night, lying in the small bunkhouse Jasper had given him, Declan could not stop thinking about the rancher's hands, the strength in them, the way they gentled when handling a newborn calf. He imagined those hands on him, and shame burned through his chest, even as heat pooled lower. He had known since he was 15 what he was, had learned to bury it deep where no one could see. In a world where men like him were beaten, or worse, desire was a secret to be locked away. But Jasper Kane made that lock rattle, made Declan wonder what it would feel like to stop hiding, just once, just for a moment. The breaking point came on a day when the heat shimmered in waves off the dry earth, and the air itself felt too thick to breathe. Declan had been hauling feed sacks all morning, his shirt soaked through, sweat dripping down his spine. He had just bent over the water trough to splash his face when he heard the footsteps behind him. He straightened slowly, water dripping from his hair, and turned to find Jasper standing in the barn entrance, silhouetted against the bright afternoon sun. The rancher's eyes were dark, intense, fixed on Declan with an expression that made his breath catch. Jasper took a step forward, then another, moving with the deliberate slowness of a man who had made a decision and would not be turned aside. Declan's heart thundered in his chest. He could have moved, could have stepped back, but his feet stayed rooted to the ground. The rancher stopped close enough that Declan could see the faint scar along his jaw, could smell leather and pine and something darker underneath. Jasper's gaze dropped to Declan's mouth, then lower, traveling down the lean lines of his body with an intensity that felt like touch. Neither spoke. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unsaid, everything forbidden. Then Jasper lifted one hand, slow and careful, giving Declan every chance to pull away. When he did not, the rancher's calloused fingers brushed along his jaw, rough and warm and impossibly gentle. Declan's eyes fluttered closed. That single touch sent fire racing through his veins, igniting every nerve until he trembled with it. He had imagined this so many times, late at night when shame and longing warred inside him, but nothing compared to the reality of Jasper's hand on his skin. The rancher's thumb traced across Declan's lower lip, and a sound escaped him, small and desperate. His eyes opened to find Jasper watching him with an expression so raw it stole his breath. Want and restraint battled in those storm-gray eyes, and Declan realized with a shock that the rancher had been fighting this too, had been holding back just as hard. That knowledge broke something inside him. All the walls he had built, all the careful distance, crumbled to dust. He swayed forward, drawn by a force stronger than reason, until his chest nearly touched Jasper's. The heat between them was overwhelming, suffocating, and Declan could not get enough of it. Jasper's other hand came up to cup the back of his neck, fingers threading through his damp hair. The touch was possessive, claiming, and it sent a shudder through Declan's entire body. He had never been held like this. He'd never been looked at like he was something precious and wanted all at once. The rancher leaned in, his breath ghosting across Declan's lips, and the world narrowed to that single point of almost contact. Declan's hands came up without thought, gripping Jasper's shirt, pulling him closer even as fear whispered warnings in the back of his mind. This was dangerous, forbidden, the kind of thing that could get them both killed. But he could not stop. Did not want to stop. When their mouths finally met, it was like touching flame to dry kindling. The kiss ignited something fierce and hungry in Declan, and he pressed closer, desperate for more. Jasper responded with equal intensity, one hand tightening in his hair while the other slid down his back, pressing him flush against the rancher's solid frame. Declan had never kissed anyone before. He had only dreamed of it in secret, shameful moments, but kissing Jasper felt like coming home and catching fire all at once. The rancher's mouth was hot and demanding, taking everything Declan offered and demanding more. He tasted like coffee and desire, and Declan drank it in like a man dying of thirst. They broke apart only when air became necessary, both breathing hard, foreheads pressed together. Declan's hand still gripped Jasper's shirt, knuckles white with the force of his need. The rancher's eyes were dark, pupils blown wide, and when he spoke, his voice was rough as gravel. "You tell me to stop, and I stop. You understand?" Declan nodded, unable to form words past the lump in his throat. But stopping was the last thing he wanted. He had spent his whole life hiding, denying, pushing down every forbidden desire until he could barely remember what it felt like to want something for himself. Now, with Jasper's hands on him and that fierce hunger burning in the rancher's eyes, he wanted to be reckless for once. He wanted to take what was being offered, consequences be damned. The rancher searched his face for a long moment, looking for any sign of hesitation. Finding none, he pulled Declan close again, this time with less restraint. His mouth found the sensitive spot below Declan's ear, and when he bit down gently, Declan gasped, his knees going weak. Jasper caught him easily, one arm wrapped around his waist, holding him steady even as he continued his assault on Declan's senses. His other hand slid beneath the wet fabric of Declan's shirt, fingers spreading across bare skin, burning hot against his ribs. Everywhere Jasper touched, fire followed, until Declan felt like he would combust from the inside out. The rancher walked him backward, never breaking contact, until Declan's back hit the rough wooden wall of the barn. The impact drove the breath from his lungs, but before he could recover, Jasper was on him again, mouth claiming his in a kiss that bordered on violent in its intensity. Declan surrendered to it completely, letting the rancher take control, losing himself in sensation. Jasper's hands were everywhere now, mapping the planes of Declan's body with a thoroughness that left him trembling. When rough fingers found the waistband of his trousers, Declan's breath hitched. This was happening. This was real. And God help him, he wanted it more than he had ever wanted anything. The rancher pulled back just enough to look at him, and the question in his eyes was clear. Declan answered by reaching up, threading his fingers through Jasper's hair and pulling him down into another searing kiss. Permission granted, consequences forgotten. What followed was a blur of sensation, of Jasper's hands and mouth on him, of being touched and claimed in ways Declan had only imagined in his darkest, most secret dreams. The rancher was demanding but never cruel, taking what he wanted while giving Declan more pleasure than he knew was possible. Every touch sent lightning through his veins. Every kiss left him gasping for air he did not need. At some point they ended up in the hay, Jasper above him, eyes burning with an intensity that stole Declan's breath. The rancher's weight pressed him down into the soft bedding, grounding him even as he felt like he might fly apart. When Jasper leaned down to whisper against his ear, the words were rough and low and filled with dark promise. "You are mine now. You understand that?" Declan could only nod, beyond words, beyond thought. He belonged to Jasper Kane now, in ways that went deeper than any contract or wage. The rancher had claimed him, body and soul, and Declan had given himself willingly. Later, when the sun had shifted and the barn lay in shadow, they lay tangled together in the hay, breathing hard, skin slick with sweat. Declan's head rested on Jasper's chest, listening to the steady thunder of the rancher's heartbeat. The reality of what they had done was starting to sink in, bringing with it a flutter of fear. But when Jasper's arm tightened around him, possessive and protective all at once, that fear quieted. The rancher's voice rumbled through his chest when he spoke. "No one can know about this. You understand that." Declan understood. What they had shared was beautiful and terrifying and completely forbidden. In a world that would see them hanged for it, secrecy was survival. He nodded against Jasper's chest, breathing in the scent of him, committing it to memory. "But in here," the rancher continued, fingers tracing idle patterns on Declan's shoulder, "you do not have to hide. Not from me." Those words settled into Declan's chest like a warm coal, glowing bright against the cold fear of discovery. For the first time in his life, he did not have to pretend. Not here, not with Jasper. It was a gift more precious than gold, and he would guard it fiercely. They lay together until the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of fire. Then, reluctantly, they untangled themselves and dressed, both acutely aware that the outside world was waiting. Jasper helped Declan brush the hay from his hair, his touch lingering longer than necessary, and Declan allowed himself to lean into it for just a moment. When they finally emerged from the barn, the ranch looked the same as it always had, but everything had changed. Declan could feel it in the way Jasper's gaze followed him as he walked to the bunkhouse, in the heat that still simmered between them, even across the distance. They had crossed a line, and there was no going back. That night, lying alone in his narrow bunk, Declan could still feel the ghost of Jasper's hands on him, could still taste the rancher's kiss on his lips. Sleep was impossible. His body hummed with restless energy, and his mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. What they had done was reckless and dangerous, could get them both killed if anyone found out. But God help him, he wanted to do it again. The days that followed were a study in restraint. In public, they maintained careful distance, spoke only of work and weather, gave no hint of what burned between them. But in stolen moments, when they were sure no one could see, Jasper's hand would brush Declan's, or their eyes would meet across the paddock and hold just a heartbeat too long. Those small touches became lifelines, proof that what had happened in the barn was real. At night, when the ranch slept and darkness covered the land, Jasper would sometimes appear at the bunkhouse door. He never spoke, just stood there waiting, and Declan would rise and follow him back to the main house. aimed to the rancher's private room where they could be together without fear of discovery. There, in the safety of locked doors and drawn curtains, they explored each other with a hunger that never seemed to diminish. Jasper was a generous lover, patient and thorough, teaching Declan's body pleasures he had never imagined. But there was possession in every touch, a claiming that went bone deep. The rancher made it clear that Declan belonged to him now, and Declan found he did not mind. After a lifetime of belonging to no one, of having nothing that was truly his, being claimed by Jasper Kane felt like finding home. But danger lurked always at the edges of their secret. The territory was harsh and unforgiving, and men who loved other men were shown no mercy. They both knew what would happen if they were discovered. Ian had heard the stories of men dragged from their homes and strung up from trees. That knowledge made every stolen moment sweeter and more desperate. Each touch weighted with the understanding that it might be their last. 3 weeks after that first time in the barn, a traveling preacher came through the territory, holding revival meetings and stirring up righteous fury. He spoke of sin and damnation, of the wickedness that lurked in men's hearts, and his words found fertile ground in the fears and prejudices of the townspeople. Declan listened to the whispers in town, heard the anger in voices speaking of unnatural acts and God's judgment, and his blood ran cold. That night, when Jasper came to him, Declan clung tighter than usual, fear making him desperate. The rancher seemed to sense his mood, gentling his touch, whispering reassurances against Declan's skin. They were careful, Jasper promised. No one would find out. But Declan could hear the worry beneath the words, could feel the tension in the rancher's body. They made love that night with a tenderness edged in desperation, both acutely aware of how fragile their happiness was. Afterward, lying in Jasper's arms, Declan allowed himself to imagine a different world, one where they could walk together in daylight, where loving each other was not a death sentence. But morning would come, and with it reality. They would go back to being employer and farmhand, strangers who barely spoke. The fantasy would have to be enough. The preacher stayed in town for 2 weeks, his sermons growing more fervent, his condemnations more specific. Declan started having nightmares, waking in cold sweats from dreams of ropes and angry crowds. Jasper noticed, of course. The rancher noticed everything about him. But there was little comfort he could offer beyond the sanctuary of his bed, and even that felt increasingly dangerous. Then came the day that changed everything. Declan had gone into town for supplies, keeping his head down and his business quick as always. But as he loaded the wagon, he overheard 2 men talking, their voices low and ugly. They spoke of a ranch hand on the Crawford place, caught with another man. The details were vague, but the outcome was clear. The hand had been beaten near to death and run out of the territory. His companion had not been so lucky. Declan's hands shook so badly he nearly dropped the sack of flour he was lifting. He finished loading as quickly as he could and drove back to the ranch with his heart in his throat. All he could think was that it could have been them. So easily, it could have been them. Jasper found him in the barn, sitting in the hay with his head in his hands. The rancher did not ask what was wrong, just sat down beside him and waited. Eventually, Declan told him what he had heard, his voice shaking with barely suppressed fear. When he finished, silence stretched between them, heavy and oppressive. Finally, Jasper spoke, his voice rough. "We could leave. Head north. Find somewhere no one knows us. Start over." Declan looked at him, hope and fear warring in his chest. "You would do that? Give up the ranch, everything you have built?" The rancher met his gaze steadily. "I would give up anything to keep you safe." Those words settled into Declan's heart like a brand, burning away the last of his doubt. Jasper Kane loved him. The rancher might never say the words aloud, might hide it behind gruff commands and careful distance in public, but he loved him, and Declan loved him back, with a fierceness that terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure. But leaving meant abandoning the only home either of them had. It meant running, and neither of them were runners by nature. So they stayed, playing their dangerous game, stealing moments of happiness between the cracks of a world that wanted them dead. The preacher eventually moved on, taking his fire and brimstone with him. But the damage was done. The territory felt more hostile now. Every glance from a stranger weighted with suspicion. Declan and Jasper became even more careful, their stolen nights less frequent, their public interactions almost cold in their formality. It was torture, being so close and yet having to pretend indifference. Declan found himself watching Jasper constantly, drinking in the sight of him like a man dying of thirst. The way the rancher moved, confident and sure, the rare smile that sometimes crossed his weathered face, the strength in his hands as he worked. Every detail was precious, committed to memory against the day when they might be torn apart. Jasper watched him too. Declan could feel those storm-gray eyes on him throughout the day, heavy with want and restraint. Sometimes their gazes would meet across the ranch yard, and in that brief moment before they looked away, Declan could see everything the rancher felt, all the desire and possessiveness and fear that matched his own. The tension between them built like a gathering storm, pressure increasing until the air itself felt charged. They were both reaching a breaking point. Declan could feel it. Something would have to give, one way or another. The question was whether it would break them apart or bind them closer together. There were moments when Declan thought he might go mad from wanting, like the afternoon he watched Jasper work a wild stallion in the corral, all controlled power and quiet command. The way the rancher moved, fluid and confident. The way his muscles shifted beneath sun-darkened skin. The way he spoke low and soothing to the animal until it calmed. Declan had gripped the fence rail until his knuckles went white, fighting the urge to vault over and close the distance between them. Or the evening when a summer storm rolled in sudden and violent. They had been mending the barn roof when the first drops fell, fat and warm. Within seconds it became a deluge, soaking them both through. They had scrambled down the ladder, laughing despite themselves, and taken shelter in the barn. Standing there dripping wet, so close their shoulders touched, Declan had felt the air between them crackle, with something more dangerous than lightning. Jasper had looked at him then, really looked, and for a heartbeat Declan thought the rancher might kiss him right there. But voices had called from the main house, someone checking they were safe, and the moment shattered. Jasper had stepped away, putting careful distance between them, and Declan had wanted to scream with frustration. The nights were worse. Lying alone in the bunkhouse, Declan could hear the wind rattle in the shutters and imagine it was Jasper's footsteps approaching. He would picture the rancher opening the door, crossing to his bed, reaching for him in the darkness. The fantasy was so vivid he could almost feel those calloused hands on his skin, could almost taste that mouth claiming his. He would touch himself then, ashamed but desperate, imagining it was Jasper's hand instead of his own. He bit his lip to stay silent, knowing the other ranch hands slept nearby, but the pleasure that rolled through him was tinged with loneliness. This was all he could have, these stolen moments of imagination, and it would never be enough. What Declan did not know was that Jasper fought the same battle. The rancher lay awake in his own bed, tormented by the knowledge that Declan was so close and yet impossibly far. He had never wanted anything the way he wanted that young man, had never felt his control slip so dangerously. It terrified him, this hunger, because he knew what it could cost them both. But terror did not stop the wanting. Nothing could stop it. Jasper would watch Declan work and feel his chest tighten with need, would catch the scent of him, sweat and hay and something uniquely Declan, and have to turn away before he did something reckless. Would lie awake calculating how many steps it would take to reach the bunkhouse, how quickly he could cross that distance, how Declan's skin would feel under his hands. The near misses became more frequent, a hand lingering too long when passing tools, eyes meeting and holding across the dinner table until someone else spoke and broke the spell. See, moments when they were alone and the air grew so heavy with unspoken desire that breathing became difficult. One afternoon, they were working in the tack room, the small space forcing them into close proximity. Declan reached up to hang a bridle at the same moment Jasper turned, and they collided. The rancher's hands came up automatically to steady him, gripping Declan's shoulders, and time seemed to stop. They stood frozen, bodies pressed together from chest to hip, both breathing hard, though they had not been exerting themselves. Jasper's eyes had gone dark, pupils blown wide, and his fingers tightened on Declan's shoulders almost painfully. Declan could feel the rancher's heart hammering against his own chest, could see the war being fought behind those storm-gray eyes. "Kiss me," Declan thought desperately. "Please just kiss me." But Jasper's iron control held. With visible effort, the rancher stepped back, releasing him, and turned away. His voice when he spoke was rough, strained. "We should finish up, getting late." Declan had nodded, not trusting his voice, and they had completed their work in tense silence. But that night, lying in his bunk, Declan made a decision. He could not keep living like this, caught between desire and denial. Something had to change. He would find a way to show Jasper that the risk was worth taking, that what they could have together was worth fighting for. He did not get the chance, because the next day, the preacher's rhetoric reached a fever pitch, and whispers started spreading through town about unnatural acts and men who needed to be driven out. And the day after that, Crawford came with his warning. And suddenly, they were out of time. The answer came on a night when autumn had turned the air crisp and the first frost painted the grass silver. Declan woke to the sound of his bunkhouse door opening, which was not unusual. What was unusual was the time. Jasper never came to him in the middle of the night, the risk too great. But there he stood, silhouetted in the doorway, and even in the darkness Declan could see the tension in his frame. Something was wrong. Declan sat up, heart already racing. "Jasper?" The rancher crossed the room in 3 long strides and pulled Declan into his arms, holding him so tightly it almost hurt. For a long moment he said nothing, just held on like Declan might disappear if he let go. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Crawford came by earlier. Warned me that some of the ranchers are getting suspicious. They have been watching the place." Ice flooded Declan's veins. "For how long?" Jasper's arms tightened. "Long enough." The implications hit Declan like a physical blow. If they had been seen, if anyone had proof of what they were doing, it was over. They would both be dead before the week was out. Fear made his breath come short and fast, panic clawing at his chest. But Jasper's hand came up to cup the back of his head, grounding him. "Listen to me. We leave tonight. I have money saved, horses ready. We ride north, cross into Canada, disappear. Start over where no one knows us." Declan pulled back just enough to see the rancher's face in the moonlight streaming through the window. "You would really do it? Leave everything?" Jasper's expression was fierce. "I told you before, I would give up anything for you. The ranch means nothing if you are not in it." Those words broke something open in Declan's chest, and before he could stop himself, he was kissing Jasper with desperate intensity, pouring everything he felt into it. All his fear and love and gratitude, all the words he did not know how to say. The rancher kissed him back just as fiercely, and for a moment the world fell away, leaving only the two of them, and this impossible, beautiful thing between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Declan nodded. "All right, we go." They dressed quickly, moving with the efficiency of men who had worked together long enough to communicate without words. Declan gathered his few possessions, everything he owned fitting into a single worn saddlebag. It should have made him sad, the poverty of it. But instead, he felt strangely free. He was leaving with nothing but the clothes on his back, and the man he loved. Somehow, that was enough. Jasper led him to the stable where 2 horses waited, already saddled and loaded with supplies. The rancher had been planning this, Declan realized, had been prepared to run at a moment's notice, just to keep them both safe. The knowledge settled warm in his chest. They mounted up and rode out into the night, leaving the Broken Spur Ranch behind without a backward glance. The moon lit their way, turning the landscape silver and strange. Declan rode beside Jasper, their horses close enough that their legs sometimes brushed, and felt something like hope kindle in his chest. The road ahead would not be easy. They would have to be careful. She would have to hide what they were to each other in every new town, but they would be together, and that was worth any hardship. Declan glanced over at Jasper, at the strong profile lit by moonlight, and felt his heart swell with love so fierce it hurt. The rancher must have felt his gaze because he turned, meeting Declan's eyes. In the darkness, away from prying eyes and judgment, Jasper allowed himself a rare smile. It transformed his face, softening the hard lines, and Declan smiled back, something breaking open inside him that had been locked tight for so long. They rode through the night, putting distance between themselves and everything they had known. By dawn, they had crossed into territory where no one knew their names or their secrets. They found shelter in an abandoned line shack, and there, in the gray morning light, they held each other close and made promises whispered against skin. Whatever came next, they would face it together. They had chosen each other over safety, over everything, and that choice bound them tighter than any wedding vows ever could. Declan looked into Jasper's storm-gray eyes and saw his whole future reflected there, uncertain but no longer lonely. The rancher kissed him then, slow and deep, a claiming and a promise all at once, and Declan kissed him back, pouring everything he had into it. They had lost everything to be together, but somehow, in that moment, it felt like winning. They traveled for 3 days, riding hard during daylight and resting only when darkness made the trail too dangerous. Jasper led them through backcountry, avoiding main roads and settlements, following paths only a man who knew the land intimately could navigate. Declan followed without question, trusting the rancher completely, his faith rewarded every time they skirted a town or crossed a river at just the right ford. On the 4th morning, they crested a rise and saw it spread before them like a promise. A valley green and lush, cut through by a silver ribbon of river, ringed by mountains that touched the sky. No buildings marred the landscape, no smoke rose from chimneys. It was empty, wild and beautiful. "This is it," Jasper said, his voice rough with emotion. "This is where we stop running." Declan stared at the valley, something loosening in his chest. They had ridden so far, fled so desperately, always looking over their shoulders. But here, in this untouched wilderness, they could finally breathe. He looked at Jasper and saw the same hope reflected in those storm-gray eyes. They descended into the valley as the sun climbed higher, exploring the land with growing excitement. The river ran clear and cold, thick with fish. Game trails crisscrossed the grassland, promising food for the taking. Near a stand of pines, they found a natural spring bubbling up from the rocks, the water sweet and pure. "We could build here," Jasper said, gesturing to a slight rise near the trees. Good drainage, shelter from the wind, close to water. Declan could see it already. A cabin rising from the earth, smoke curling from a stone chimney, a life they could make together without fear. He nodded, throat tight with emotion. Yes, this is home. They made camp that night beneath the stars, and for the first time since leaving the broken spur, they did not take turns keeping watch. Here, miles from civilization, they could both rest. Jasper built a fire while Declan tended the horses, and when the work was done, they sat close, shoulders touching, staring into the flames. The rancher's hand found Declan's in the darkness, fingers interlacing, and they sat like that for a long time without speaking. Words felt inadequate for what lay between them, for the enormity of what they had done. They had gambled everything on this desperate flight, had chosen each other over safety and certainty. And somehow, miraculously, they had found something better than what they left behind. That night, lying together under a blanket beneath the vast sweep of stars, Jasper held Declan close and whispered against his hair, "I love you. Never said it before. Never felt it before you. But I love you, Declan Flynn, and I will build you a home here where you never have to hide again." Declan turned in his arms, blinking back tears, and kissed him with everything he had. The words stuck in his throat, too big and bright to speak, but he poured them into the kiss instead, and Jasper understood. The rancher always understood. They made love that night with the stars as witnesses, slow and tender, a celebration and a claiming all at once. Declan gave himself over completely, trusting Jasper with his body and his heart, and the rancher took both with reverent care. Afterward, tangled together in the blankets, Declan felt more whole than he ever had in his life. The next weeks were spent in hard labor and simple joy. They felled trees for the cabin, hauled stone for the foundation, dug a root cellar into the hillside. The work was backbreaking, but they tackled it together, and Declan found satisfaction in watching their home rise from nothing. Every log they raised, every stone they set, was a declaration that they belonged here, that they were building something that would last. In the evenings, exhausted and filthy from the day's work, they would wash in the cold river and then sit by the fire, planning and dreaming. Jasper talked about running cattle in the valley, about building corrals and planting crops. Declan listened and added his own ideas, feeling the future take shape between them like something solid and real. But the best moments came at night, when the work was done and they could finally be together without restraint. Here, there were no neighbors to avoid, no eyes watching for signs of sin. They could touch freely, could kiss in daylight, could hold each other without fear. That freedom was sweeter than anything Declan had ever tasted. Jasper was an attentive lover, learning Declan's body with the same thoroughness he brought to everything else. He discovered what made Declan gasp, what made him moan, what drove him to the edge of madness and beyond. And Declan learned the rancher in turn, found the places where Jasper's control would shatter, where he would surrender to sensation and let Declan take the lead. One night, several weeks into their new life, Jasper pulled Declan close and whispered a question against his ear. "Stay with me, not just for now, but always. Build this life with me, grow old in this valley, be mine for as long as we both draw breath." It was as close to a proposal as two men could make. And Declan's answer came without hesitation. Yes. Always yes. They sealed the promise with their bodies, coming together with a passion edged in tenderness. And when it was over, Declan lay in Jasper's arms feeling like he had finally found where he belonged. Not in a place, but with this man, this strong, steady presence, who had chosen him above all else. The cabin was finished by the first snowfall, sturdy and warm, with a stone fireplace that could heat the whole space and thick walls to keep out the bitter cold. They celebrated its completion by christening every room, making love with abandon now that they had walls and a roof between them and the world. Winter settled over the valley, blanketing everything in white silence. They were snowed in for weeks at a time, completely alone, and it should have been isolating. But Declan had never been happier. He woke each morning to Jasper's warmth beside him, spent his days working alongside the rancher to keep them fed and warm, and his nights wrapped in strong arms that made him feel safe and wanted. They talked during those long winter nights, sharing stories they had never told anyone. Jasper spoke of growing up hard, of a father who ruled with fists and a mother who died too young. Declan told him about the loneliness of knowing he was different, of watching other boys court girls and feeling only emptiness. They laid bare their scars and their fears, and in doing so drew even closer together. Spring came eventually, melting the snow and turning the valley green once more. They emerged from their winter cocoon, ready to truly build the ranch Jasper had envisioned. They rode to the nearest settlement, 2 days south, and bought cattle, chickens, supplies for planting. The merchants asked no questions about why two men were ranching together, and Declan realized that out here, on the edge of civilization, people were too busy surviving to worry about how others lived. They returned to the valley and threw themselves into the work of making the ranch productive. Jasper taught Declan everything he knew about raising cattle, about reading the weather and the land. Declan proved a quick study, his natural affinity for animals combining with Jasper's knowledge to make them an effective team. The ranch prospered, their herd grew, their crops came in strong, and slowly they built something substantial. But more importantly, their bond deepened. They fell into rhythms and routines, learned each other's moods and needs without words. Jasper's rare smiles became more frequent, his gruff exterior softening around the edges, and Declan, who had spent so long hiding his true self, bloomed in the freedom of being fully known and fully loved. They were not without challenges. A harsh winter their second year killed half the herd, and they spent months rebuilding. A grizzly bear came sniffing around one spring, and Jasper took a bad gash to his leg, driving it off. Declan nursed him through the fever that followed, terrified of losing the man who had become his whole world. And when Jasper recovered, they held each other and acknowledged how fragile their happiness was. But they endured. Through hard seasons and setbacks, through loneliness and doubt, they endured. And their love, tested by isolation and hardship, only grew stronger. They learned to rely on each other completely, to trust in the strength of what they had built together. 5 years passed in that valley, marked by the changing seasons and the steady growth of their ranch. Declan, who had arrived hollow and desperate, filled out and grew strong. Jasper's hard edges softened, the tension he had carried for so long finally easing. They were happy, truly happy, in a way neither had believed possible. But the outside world has a way of intruding, no matter how far you run. It came in the form of a rider, appearing one autumn afternoon as Declan was mending fence. The man was young, maybe 20, with nervous eyes and travel-worn clothes. He pulled up his horse and called out a greeting. Declan approached cautiously, years of hiding making him wary. The rider introduced himself as Thomas. He said he was passing through on his way north, but there was something in his eyes, a familiar fear, that made Declan's chest tighten. Jasper emerged from the barn, and Thomas's gaze flicked between them, sharp and assessing. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the young man dismounted, his movements careful, and when he spoke, his voice shook. "I heard there were 2 men living alone up in this valley. Heard it from a trapper who came through last winter. I had to see for myself if it was true." Declan's blood ran cold. They had been found. After 5 years of safety, someone had discovered them. His hand moved instinctively toward the rifle leaning against the fence post, but Jasper's voice stopped him. "Why did you come here, boy?" Thomas looked up and Declan saw tears in his eyes. "Because I am like you, and they are hunting men like us back east. I ran, same as you must have. I just needed to know there was somewhere safe, somewhere I could survive being what I am." The words hung in the air, and Declan felt something shift. This was not a threat. This was a desperate soul, seeking proof that escape was possible. He looked at Jasper and saw understanding dawn in the rancher's eyes. "You are safe here," Jasper said gruffly, "long as you do not bring trouble." They took Thomas in, gave him food and a place to sleep in the barn. Over dinner, he told his story. He had been driven from his home when his family discovered his nature, had fled west with nothing but fear driving him forward. He had heard whispers of men disappearing into the wilderness, of places where the old rules did not apply, and he had chased those rumors all the way to their valley. Declan listened and remembered his own flight, the terror and desperation that had marked every mile. Looking at Thomas, he saw his younger self, lost and afraid, and he knew they could not turn him away. Thomas stayed through the winter, working alongside them, learning the ranch. He was eager and grateful, and slowly the fear left his eyes, replaced by something like hope. Watching him heal, Declan felt a new purpose taking shape. They had found safety, had built a life where they could be themselves. But there were others out there, running scared, believing they were alone. One night, lying in bed with Jasper's arm around him, Declan voiced the thought that had been growing. We could help them, others like Thomas. Word is spreading that this valley exists. We could make it a real sanctuary. Jasper was quiet for a long time, and Declan worried he had overstepped, but then the rancher pulled him closer and spoke into the darkness. "You have a good heart, Declan Flynn. Always have. If you want to open our home to others running from the same hell we escaped, then that is what we will do." And so their sanctuary grew. Word spread slowly, carefully, through networks of desperate men who had learned to recognize their own kind. One by one, they came. Some stayed only long enough to rest before moving on. Others put down roots, building cabins in the valley, starting their own ranches. A community formed, small and hidden, but real. Declan and Jasper became the heart of it, the first and the foundation. Men looked to them for guidance, for proof that a life of freedom was possible. And they gave it gladly, sharing what they had learned, offering safety to those who had none. Not everyone who came was lost. Some, like Marcus and Joel, arrived together, their bond already formed, seeking only a place where they could live openly. Others, like Samuel, came broken and took years to heal, finding solace in the community of men who understood. Each had their own story, their own scars, but in the valley they found acceptance. Each arrival brought their own story of pain and survival. There was William, who had been beaten nearly to death by his own brothers and left for dead on the side of a road. He arrived gaunt and haunted, flinching at sudden movements, but under Jasper's patient guidance, he learned to work with horses and slowly regained his strength. Declan would often find him in the corral at dawn, he speaking soft words to the animals, healing himself through caring for them. Then came Samuel and his younger brother Henry, fleeing a town that had lynched their neighbor for the crime of existing. Samuel was fierce and protective, Henry barely 16 and terrified. Jasper and Declan gave them land on the eastern slope, helped them build a cabin, taught them to survive. Over time, Samuel's hard edges softened, and Henry's smile returned. They became family in the truest sense. Martin arrived in the dead of winter, half frozen and delirious with fever. They nursed him back to health over weeks, and when he recovered, he wept with gratitude. He had been a school teacher once, he told them, until someone had seen him with another man, and his whole life had shattered in a single night. He stayed in the valley, each eventually teaching the younger men to read and write, finding purpose in sharing knowledge. Marcus and Joel had traveled from California, chasing rumors of this hidden valley, and when they finally found it, they stood at the entrance holding hands and crying with relief. They had been together for 3 years, hiding in plain sight, living as business partners while their hearts belonged to each other. In the valley, they could finally stop pretending. Declan watched them build their cabins side by side, watched them kiss openly in daylight, and felt profound joy. This was why the sanctuary mattered. The community developed its own rhythms and rules. They helped each other with harvests and building projects, shared resources during hard times, and protected each other fiercely. Raiders who came looking for easy targets learned quickly that the valley was defended by men who had everything to lose and no intention of going quietly. One such attempt came in their 8th year. A gang of outlaws, hearing rumors of men living without women, assumed they would be easy prey. They rode into the valley at dawn, guns drawn, expecting to find weakness. What they found instead was a wall of armed men, Jasper at the center with Declan at his side, and behind them 24 more who had fought too hard for their freedom to surrender it. The battle was brief and brutal. The outlaws retreated with their wounded, and word spread that the hidden valley was not to be trifled with. After that, they were left alone. But the community understood they could never be complacent. They took turns standing watch. Each kept their weapons maintained and trained together in case defense became necessary again. Through it all, Declan and Jasper remained the steady center. Their love, tested by time and hardship, had only grown deeper. They knew each other's bodies as well as their own, could communicate with a glance, move together with the easy synchronicity of long partnership. And every night, no matter how tired or how many demands had been made on them, they came together and reaffirmed what they had built. But it was not always easy. The responsibility of leadership weighed heavy sometimes. Men came to them with disputes, with fears, with needs they struggled to meet. There were nights when Jasper would sit silent by the fire, the weight of everyone's expectations pressing down on him, and Declan would simply hold him, he offering the comfort of presence when words failed. And there were moments when Declan wondered if they had taken on too much, if trying to save everyone would break them. But then he would see William laughing with the horses, or Henry reading by lamplight, or Marcus and Joel working their fields side by side, and he would remember why it mattered. Every man they sheltered was a life saved, a future reclaimed. That was worth any burden. The community celebrated together too. Harvest festivals where they shared food and stories. Winter gatherings around massive bonfires where songs were sung and dances improvised. Quiet moments of acknowledgement when two men chose each other and the community witnessed their bond. These were not weddings in any legal sense, but they carried the same weight, the same promise. And 10 years after that first desperate flight, Declan stood on the porch of their cabin and looked out over the valley. Smoke rose from a dozen chimneys now, marking the homes that dotted the landscape. Cattle grazed peacefully, and in the distance he could see men working their fields. It was a community, a home, a place where men like him could live without fear. Jasper came up behind him, arms wrapping around his waist, chin resting on his shoulder. They stood like that often now, comfortable in their affection, no longer needing to hide even from themselves. The rancher's voice rumbled against Declan's back. "You did this, turned one man's escape into hope for dozens." Declan shook his head, leaning back into Jasper's warmth. "We did this, together, and that was the truth of it. Everything they had built, and from that first cabin to this thriving sanctuary, they had done together. Two men who had found each other in desperate circumstances and chosen to make something beautiful from their shared exile. That night, they made love with the slow tenderness of long familiarity, bodies moving together in patterns learned over years of practice. Jasper took his time, drawing out Declan's pleasure until he trembled and begged, only giving him release when he could take no more, and then Declan returned the favor, using everything he knew about the rancher's body to drive him to the edge and beyond. Afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, Declan felt peace settle over him like a blanket. He had spent so much of his young life believing he was wrong, broken, deserving of punishment, but Jasper had shown him the truth. Love was not a sin, and choosing to be true to yourself was the bravest thing a man could do. The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythm of seasons and the steady growth of their community. Declan's hair began to show silver at the temples, and lines formed at the corners of Jasper's eyes. They grew older together, their bodies changing, but their bond remaining strong. New arrivals still came, though less frequently now, as other sanctuaries formed in distant territories, but those who did come found the same welcome Declan and Jasper had extended from the beginning. A place at the table, a helping hand, and the freedom to be themselves without judgment or fear. On their 15th anniversary in the valley, the community threw a celebration. It was not called a wedding, could not be, but everyone understood what it meant. Two men who had chosen each other, who had built a life and a community from nothing, who had proven that love could endure and even flourish in the harshest conditions. They danced that night under the stars, surrounded by friends and found family, and Declan felt his heart swell with gratitude. He had come to the Broken Spur Ranch, broken and desperate, had found in Jasper Kane not just an employer but a partner, a lover, a reason to keep living. And together they had built something that mattered, a place where men like them could find not just survival, but joy. As the celebration wound down and people drifted back to their homes, Jasper pulled Declan close and kissed him, deep and slow, in front of everyone. It was a declaration, a claiming, a promise renewed, and Declan kissed him back with everything he had. He'd poured 15 years of love and gratitude and hope into it. That night, alone in their cabin, they made love with the passion of newlyweds and the tenderness of long partnership. Jasper whispered promises against Declan's skin, vows they had made 100 times, but never tired of repeating, to love and protect, to stand together against whatever came, to choose each other every day for the rest of their lives. And Declan gave his own promises in return, his body and voice affirming what his heart had always known. He belonged to Jasper Kane, and Jasper belonged to him, and that belonging was the foundation upon which everything else was built. The morning found them tangled together, bodies fitting perfectly after so many years of practice. Declan woke first, watching the sun paint gold across Jasper's sleeping face, and felt overwhelming love wash through him. This man had saved him in every way a person could be saved, had given him a home, a purpose, a family, had loved him when the world said he was unlovable. Jasper's eyes opened, and the smile that crossed his face was soft and genuine, reserved only for these private moments. "Morning," he rumbled, voice still rough with sleep. "Morning," Declan replied, and leaned in for a kiss, that quickly turned heated. They made love in the golden dawn light, slow and sweet, a perfect start to another day in the life they had built together. Later, over breakfast, they talked about plans for the coming season. Another cabin needed to be built for new arrivals, and the irrigation system needed expanding. Normal concerns for their small community, but weighted with satisfaction. This was their life's work, providing sanctuary for those who needed it most. As Declan washed the dishes, Jasper came up behind him, arms encircling his waist. The rancher's voice was quiet when he spoke. "Do you ever regret it? Leaving the broken spur, everything you knew?" Declan turned in his arms, meeting those storm-gray eyes he loved so much. "Not for a single second. You gave me a life worth living, Jasper. Everything else was just survival." They stood like that, holding each other in the morning light streaming through the windows, and Declan felt the rightness of it settle into his bones. This was where he belonged, in this valley, in this man's arms, building something that mattered. The day passed in productive labor and easy companionship. They worked side by side as always, anticipating each other's needs, moving together with practiced coordination. And when night fell, they came together again, bodies and hearts aligned, reaffirming the bond that had carried them through so much. 20 years after that first kiss in the barn, Declan stood on the same porch and marveled at how far they had come. The valley was home to over 30 men now, a thriving community built on acceptance and mutual support. They had weathered droughts and harsh winters, had fought off those who sought to destroy them, and had emerged stronger each time. Jasper joined him, moving slower now, his joints stiff from decades of hard labor. But his embrace was still strong, his love still fierce. They stood together watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of fire, and Declan leaned into the rancher's warmth with deep contentment. "We built something good here," Jasper said softly. "Something that will outlast us." Declan nodded, throat tight with emotion. "We did, and it all started with you choosing to save a desperate farmhand instead of turning him away." Jasper's laugh rumbled through his chest. "Best decision I ever made." They made love that night with the tenderness of decades, bodies familiar but no less cherished. Jasper took his time, as he always did, making sure Declan felt loved and desired even as their youth faded. And Declan gave himself over completely, trusting as he had always trusted, loving as he would always love. Afterward, lying in the darkness, Declan spoke the words he had carried in his heart for over 20 years. "I love you, Jasper Kane. From that first moment in the barn until my last breath, I will love you. And I love you," the rancher replied, voice thick with emotion. "You made me believe in second chances, in happiness I never thought possible. Every day with you has been a gift." They held each other through the night, and when morning came, they rose to face another day together, building, loving, protecting the sanctuary they had created. Two men who had chosen each other against all odds, who had proven that love could survive and flourish even in the harshest wilderness. Their story became legend in the scattered communities of men like them, passed down as proof that escape was possible, that love was worth fighting for. And though they never sought recognition, content to live their quiet life in the valley, Declan and Jasper's names became synonymous with hope. The years continued their steady march. They grew old together, their bodies wearing down but their love remaining constant. When Jasper's arthritis made riding difficult, Declan took over more of the ranch work. When Declan's eyes began to fail, Jasper read to him by the fire each evening. They adapted, as they had always adapted, facing each challenge together. On a summer evening in their 40th year together, they sat on the porch watching the next generation work the fields, young men who had come seeking sanctuary and found family, who would carry forward the community Declan and Jasper had built. The rancher's hand found Declan's, fingers interlacing with the ease of long practice. "No regrets?" Jasper asked, though he already knew the answer. "None," Declan replied firmly. "Only gratitude." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, two old men who had loved each other through everything life could throw at them. And when night fell and they made their way to bed, they held each other close, grateful for another day, another night, another chance to love. Their ending, when it came, was peaceful. Jasper went first, passing in his sleep with Declan's hand in his. And Declan, after saying goodbye to the community they had built and ensuring its future, followed his partner 6 months later. They were buried side by side on the hill overlooking the valley, their graves marked with simple stones that bore only their names and the years they had shared. But their legacy lived on in the valley that still provided sanctuary, in the men who told their story to new arrivals, in the proof they had left behind that love between men could be as strong and enduring as any other. Declan Flynn and Jasper Kane had found each other in desperate circumstances. Each had chosen love over fear and had built something beautiful that would outlast them both. And somewhere, in whatever comes after, they were together still, hands clasped, hearts aligned, love eternal. Thank you for being here tonight. If this story reminded you that love is worth fighting for, that sanctuary can be built even in the wilderness, that choosing to be true to yourself is the bravest act of all, then it has served its purpose. Subscribe to hear more stories of courage and hope from the frontier, and remember that sometimes the greatest adventure is simply choosing to love.